On This Week in Enterprise Tech, it's the start of 2015. So let's talk about the evolution of cyber attacks. Oh, I don't know, maybe how to protect yourself when you're traveling in the new year. And Cricket Lou stops by to give us the lowdown on DNS. Twiet on the set.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for This Week in Enterprise Tech is provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com.
This is Twiet, This Week in Enterprise Tech, episode 123, recorded December 19th, 2014 for January 5th, 2015. Cricket Lou and DNS2. This Week in Enterprise Tech is brought to you by HipChat Plus. Collaborate, save time, and be more productive with your teams. HipChat Plus is IM video chat plus file code and screen sharing all in one place. Invite your team members and get a free 30-day trial at hipchat.com/Twiet. And by lynda.com. Lynda.com offers thousands of online video courses to help you, your team, or your entire organization learn the latest software, creative, and business skills. To learn more about lynda.com solutions for your school, business, or government agency, visit lynda.com/Twiet. That's LYNDA.com/Twiet. And by ZipRecruiter. ZipRecruiter makes hiring faster, easier, and cheaper. Post your job to 50-plus job boards with one click. Try ZipRecruiter with a free 4-day trial now at ZipRecruiter.com/Twiet. That's ZipRecruiter.com/Twiet. Welcome to Twiet, This Week in Enterprise Tech. It's the show dedicated to the enterprise professional, the IT pro, and the geek who just wants to know how the world is connected. I'm your host, Father Robert Ballecer, the digital Jesuit, your guide to all things in the enterprise, and I welcome you to 2015. Of course, I'm not welcoming you alone. I've included Father Time, Mr. Brian Chee, the director of the Advanced Network Computing Laboratory in Honolulu, Hawaii. Brian, thank you for that big old scythe thing and welcoming us into the new year.
You bet. And I want to do a shout out to the kids at El Cerrito High School that I went to go visit in the Christmas season. Hey guys, it was great talking to you.
Of course, a new year is not good enough with just Father Time. We've also got that baby in the diapers. Mr. Curtis Franklin. Curtis, thank you for coming back for 2015, sir. It is always good to see you.
It wouldn't be a new year without Twiet. Padre, happy to be here.
Well, gentlemen, we've got a fantastic show planned for the first of 2015, so let's get right to it, starting with the blips. Now, you probably didn't notice, but the SCO versus the world for domination of Linux was settled 3 weeks ago. Yeah, 3 weeks ago. Again, we think, for the last time. Probably. Well, U.S. District Court Judge David Nufrine ruled, and I quote, SCO is bound by and may not here relitigate the rulings in the Novell judgment that Novell, not SCO, owns the copyrights to the pre-1996 Unix source code and that Novell waived SCO's contract claims against IBM for alleged breaches of the licensing agreements pursuant to which IBM licensed such source code. Since SCO has been comatose since its bankruptcy in 2013, many are hoping that this decision will finally be the decapitation of the zombie lawsuit that the world needs to defend against time and time again in this most classic of patent trolls.
Now, the cloud is growing quickly, but the hybrid cloud is growing even more quickly. IDC is out with a set of predictions on the global cloud market, and they are hot. Private, public, and hybrid clouds will hit a market size of $118 billion in 2015 and make it to $200 billion by 2018. That's a 23% rise over the $95.8 billion that they hit in 2014. Analyst Technology Business Research says the private cloud market is expected to grow 35% this year. The public cloud will grow 25%. Hybrid, on the other hand, will grow 50% in the coming year, according to these analysts. It's important to note that many companies are experimenting with hybrid clouds even before they become comfortable with pure public or private clouds. Security is the main driver for the shift, with performance playing a supporting role. Either way, building hybrid cloud skills seems one of the best career bets in IT for 2015.
A CNET article starts off with ISS astronaut needs a wrench, and NASA emails him one. If you don't think 3D printing is having an impact, just take a gander at the wrench ISS astronaut Barry Wilmore is holding that he 3D printed from a design that NASA emailed to him. So my other prediction for 2014 is that we're finally going to start seeing 3D printed spare parts emerging in the marketplace.
Great news for Cisco. All of their data center customers will be switching to their next-gen switch by the end of 2015. File this one under the Drop the Mic folder. Cisco has announced that all their data center customers have contracted to replace their aging Cisco Catalyst 6500 switches with the new Cisco Nexus 9000 switch before the end of the year. While the two platforms may work side by side for a time, Cisco is convinced that the ability for customers to move from the Workhorse 6500 over the Nexus 2000, 5000, and 7000 series to the Nexus 9000 is giving customers a tremendous value, as it allows them to essentially skip all the mid-2000 architectures directly to the one that supports Cisco's application-centric infrastructure flavor of SDN. Great news for Cisco indeed. Not so great for any other vendor wanting to make inroads with SDN.
Well, there's good news at last. IT budgets are growing again. According to the results from Information Week's 2015 Outlook survey, more than half of the IT directors interviewed expect their IT budgets to grow in fiscal year 2015. 39% say that their budgets will increase by 5% or more, the biggest such bump in more than half a decade. For those looking to change jobs or get into IT, the news is almost as good. Nearly a third of the companies surveyed say that they will be adding to IT headcount in the coming year. Some of the most interesting information, though, came in questions about so-called shadow IT. Roughly a third say that other business units have their own IT budgets, while another third say that those units are spending on IT without a formal budget. About 30% say that there is no IT spending outside the IT department. Numbers on whether these professionals are very controlling or simply delusional is not yet available.
Well, in the news from Ars Technica, the Obama administration thinks Sony made a mistake by caving to the hackers. It really comes as no surprise, since the U.S. has always had a policy of not giving in to blackmail, and I've got to agree that Sony made a mistake. I would have loved for the special forces to bust down the door of the hackers, but it's easy to make predictions and opinions as a backseat driver.
Hey, IT managers, are you ready to be depressed? It costs $30 to fight off every $1 spent by those who are attacking your networks. Microsoft security researcher Paul McKittrick and Iceberg founder William Petroy presented at a Hacker Fest in Wellington at the end of December, where they presented something that IT admins are all too aware of. It costs way more to defend against threats than hackers need to spend to attack. A quick perusal of the presentation shows that an attacker with $2,500 can purchase enough DDoS power to drain almost $100,000 from IT coffers, while an attacker with access to $100,000 can buy enough zero-day exploits and custom backdoors to successfully penetrate even a well-equipped IT plant. Though they were clear that this isn't a doom and gloom scenario with plenty of options still on the table, perhaps the terrible reaches of 2014 might make us think beyond perimeter security and outspending the hackers. Now, when we come back, we're going to be jumping into the first enterprise bites of 2015. But before that, let's go ahead and take a break and hear a word from the first sponsor of this week in Enterprise Tech. This episode is brought to you by HipChat Plus. How is your team communicating? Are they using a variety of email, IM, texting, cloud storage, and document sharing apps? HipChat puts everything in one place and is designed specifically for business. HipChat Plus is IM, video chat, document sharing, screen sharing, system updates, and code sharing integrated into one simple platform. Email is too slow, meetings get sidetracked, and regular IM doesn't quite work for groups. HipChat Plus keeps your team in sync, and it works from any device, no matter where you are. The best part? HipChat integrates with the top developer tools like GitHub, Jira, Zendesk, and more. Check out the 57 services that HipChat plays nice with. HipChat brings your entire project and team communication together. HipChat is easy to set up, fun to use, and it makes your team wildly productive. Get your team on the same page in seconds. I want you to try HipChat Plus free. No credit card is required. Visit hipchat.com/Twyet. Click on the Start Chatting to sign up, then invite a few team members and try it free for 30 days. Remember, that's hipchat.com/Twyet. And for the first 100 signups, HipChat is going to extend their 30-day free trial to 90 days. HipChat, your team, your project, in sync, instantly. And we thank HipChat for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Let's go ahead and jump straight back into the meat. We've got the first enterprise bite of the new year, and it's all about the evolution of cyber attacks. We've got a report from Dark Reading talking all about the trend that we've seen between 2013 and 2014. Now, in 2013, we saw a trend of increasingly large cyber attacks that seemed to peak in 2014 with the rise of NTP and DNS amplification attacks. In other words, asynchronous attacks on corporate networks that allowed a single 1 megabit per second pipe to be amplified through the use of unsecured DNS and NTP servers to easily a 40 gigabit per second DDoS. It was a fantastically devastating attack, and we saw it more and more as a weapon of choice. Now, we've come to expect the rise in ferocity of attacks as it becomes easier and cheaper to clog up big pipes with garbage traffic. But there is another trend that this Dark Reading article found even more disturbing, and that's the rise of the continuous attack. Security vendor Radware performed a survey of tech executives and found that 19% of them reported attacks on infrastructure to be constant, while a full 15% of them were able to log single attacks that lasted longer than a month. In fact, one logged an attack that has lasted more than a year. Now, let me throw this over to you first, Chee. It sounds like something simple, that these attacks are just going on longer. But there is a shift that has to take place in the mind of an IT department when they realize it's not just occasionally they receive garbage traffic, but that they will always and forever be under attack.
My opinion is join the club.
Yeah.
I mean, at a major university, we're a big target. We've got big pipes. We're under constant attack. In fact, right now, if you have an unpatched server, say an old one, say like a 2003 or something like that, and you stick it outside a firewall, the average lifespan before it's owned is about 45 seconds. I'm sorry. Welcome to the club. The industry itself needs to do something different. I'm just not sure what yet.
All right. Sinak in the chat room is saying something that we've done at Interop. In fact, we do this if you've ever had a close relationship with your ISP, with your telco, and that is to cut off the attacks upstream. Yes, you can do that. And in fact, that was anticipated in this survey. So these IT managers are doing the right things. They're using whitelists and blacklists to make sure that when they fall under attack, that they can cut it off upstream. But that's what makes this so disturbing, because these attacks go on and on and on and continue and jump IP pools. You're spending way more of your resources on stopping a single attack than you would have in 2013 or 2012. Curtis, let me throw this over to you. DDoS still gets the lion's share of ink whenever we see one of them, because they're impressive. I mean, if you can throw 10, 20, 40 gigabits of traffic at a single target, that makes the news. And as Chee said, those attacks are normally short-lived, maybe an hour, maybe 2 hours. Most of them 10, 15 minutes, just enough to get your attention. But again, this report and the troubling thing, and I want to hear your voice on what the enterprise is doing about it, is a popular company that now knows that even doing all those things upstream, they're going to be getting 1 or 2 gigabits of garbage traffic pounding up against their perimeter defense at all time. How do they deal with it?
Well, I think the question of how they deal with it is something that they're still working on. The big change in mindset is that traditionally, the response to something like a DDoS or any volume-based attack is essentially to put up your defenses and weather the storm. We're going to throw up the electronic equivalents of sandbags, wait for the wave to crash over us, know what we do against that particular DDoS attack, then go back to normal. What's having to change is the recognition that the constant level of volume-based attacking is the new normal. And so I think what you're seeing is a lot of people doing interesting load balancing things. People are moving their own DNS and other services around to try to get away from this. They're becoming more creative, but it's something that they're having to learn. It's a new style of attack. People are having to get outside of the comfort zone they were in for so long. And oh, by the way, they've got to remember not to devote so many resources to these attacks that they lower their guard against some of the other even more destructive attacks that can occur while a volume-based attack is underway. It's tricky, but the good news, if there is any, is that the lessons learned right now are going to be applicable for a long, long time, because this kind of attack has become so easy, you can bet that it's not going away anytime in the near future.
Right. And actually, I'm glad that you bring that up, because we've heard that from several of the guests on This Week in Enterprise Tech last year in 2014. In fact, we've heard it from our security gurus, both Steve Gibson and Raphael Mudge, that more and more we're seeing that these DDoS attacks and these DNS and NTP amplification attacks are being used to cover a different kind of attack to plant an advanced persistent threat. In fact, if we look at some of the attacks from 2014, Target, Home Depot, JP Morgan Chase, SuperValue, UPS, Dairy Queen, and Sony, at least half of those attacks included a massive DDoS that was blocked, but probably pulled resources away from some spear phishing that was able to penetrate vulnerable systems. Cheebert, we have to, this is our new reality, right? I mean, DDoSes are so loud and they make lights flash, but they're most of the time now just a cover for something that's happening over here.
Totally agree. You know, like I said, I'm sorry, welcome to the club. Universities have had to deal with this for a very, very long time. And it's gotten so normal that I've actually started putting an awful lot of filters in just so I can start telling the forest from the trees.
Yeah, yeah. Now, Radware did find in this study that was released that most enterprises are ready to fight off large attacks, but that few are actually able to fight off constant attacks. Again, there is a difference between the two. Also, while 74% of the 567 IT executives that were surveyed responded that they did have a breach policy in place, only 30% of them were confident that it could protect data in the event of a breach, and another 30% said they were not confident at all that it could protect data in the event of a breach. Curtis, let me throw this to you. With Sony still hanging huge, and with all the impacts that are just trickling down from that breach that probably ran for a year, and with the smart IT people saying that the next APT, the next major breach, is already in progress. It's already happening right now. It just hasn't been reported. What's happening on the executive level of enterprises to say we need a comprehensive way to deal with a breach, not if, but when it happens?
Well, I think the big thing that's going on has to be audits and reviews taking place all over corporate America, with boards and executive teams going to their IT department and saying, essentially, we want you to reassure us that what happened to Sony isn't happening here and won't happen here. The smart IT people are going through with a fine-tooth comb, trying to make sure that they haven't been seeing this slow drip of data exfiltrating from their systems. I'm not sure how they're going to go about telling their board with a straight face that it can't happen. I think what we're going to hear more and more are companies who are building the infrastructure to respond to a breach as quickly as possible, understanding that breaches are going to happen and knowing what you're going to do when they do. That's going to become, if anything, more important than any sort of pseudo guarantee that a breach isn't possible.
All right. Cheebert, last question on this subject. We've talked a lot in 2014 about switching from a perimeter defense to something that actually looks at outbound traffic. And in fact, we mentioned IDA Security several times because they've come on the show, and they were a big proponent of doing that on the consumer level. we're starting to see products from enterprise vendors that are doing that are doing deep packet inspection of outbound traffic, especially outbound traffic that looks innocent, you know, pings and DNS queries, to see if they contain any information that shouldn't be leaving the network. But when does that become something that people demand? That an executive will be able to say, if I don't have a firewall that's looking at my outbound traffic, then I don't consider myself in compliance?
Well, I think there's going to be more sophisticated ways of looking at traffic over a longer term. There are already quite a few firewalls where they are equally as effective for inbound and outbound. In fact, the InfoWorld article I did on firewalls actually had the scenario where an infected laptop from, you know, some executive's kid is plugged onto a trusted network and it starts attacking the inside, and we tested for both. So they do exist. I personally think people need to go and chop up their networks a little bit more so that firewalls have a chance at looking at different segments of traffic. But I foresee we're going to finally start seeing more and more products that can look at what's happening with the internal traffic patterns. So even before the traffic hits a perimeter firewall, we need to be looking at what kinds of things are happening. You know, I keep hoping someday there's going to be something that'll be able to go and find these real low and slow persistent threats. And I think they're just starting to emerge. We actually interviewed some last year, and I'm hoping we see more sophisticated tools emerge in 2015.
I think the key word for 2015 will be, again, trust no one, even yourself. Let's see if that takes. Let's go ahead and move on to the second enterprise bite of 2015. And I want to do something a little bit different here, because we've been wanting to do an episode on best practices for travel for a while. It never came together in 2014. Let's do a little teaser for 2015. All three of us travel a lot. In fact, all three of us used to be professional travelers, and we'd be taking a lot of equipment with us, and we'd be connected to a lot of very sensitive enterprise sources of information. I wanted to go down some of our favorite ways to protect ourselves when we're on the go. Are you guys okay for that? Are you down for that?
Totally down.
Sounds like a plan.
All right, let me kick this off. This one, I'm going to start with the low-hanging fruit. This is the easy one. This is one that it almost pains me to repeat because I think everyone should know it. And yet, every time I say it, there's people who look at me and go, oh, that's a really good idea. It is this. If you're using a Wi-Fi system that has anybody else on it, I don't care if it's encrypted, but if it's a shared encryption, and definitely if it's a public Wi-Fi, there is no reason in 2015 not to be using a VPN. You can get free VPN services that will encrypt your traffic between you and your proxy to make sure that someone's not just sitting on the line and snooping. Cheebert, again, this sounds like one of those things of duh, no, this is a no-brainer, and yet it's amazing how many times I or someone like me might sit in a cafe with a Wi-Fi device in promiscuous mode and see all the clear text traffic that just runs through a public Wi-Fi system.
Way too prevalent. Way too easy. Yeah, I totally agree. I'll back that 100%. VPNs make a huge difference. Let's start doing it.
Yeah, yeah. And the funny thing is, many enterprise customers have VPNs. Your business probably has a VPN-capable firewall. You can proxy through yourself for absolutely nothing. Now, there are people in the chat room saying, well, is there free fast VPNs? Yes and no. Free and fast don't normally go together. Like, for example, ProXPN, which has been a sponsor of the Twit TV network. I don't think they're a sponsor right now, but they offer a fantastic service, which is free, and then you can pay for more speed if you want it. But in this day and age, when you can run a single piece of software on your PC, your Mac, your iOS, your Android, I don't know why you wouldn't do it. Curtis, what about that? I mean, encrypt, encrypt, encrypt. That used to be your motto, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's the right thing to do. It's the safe thing to do. The reason more people don't do it is because it is just that one more step. And what most, especially consumers, are about is lowering what I like to call transactional friction. In other words, those things that add any additional time or effort to the process of doing something. Now, in a corporate enterprise setting, there is no excuse. Every enterprise I know has a VPN They put the VPN clients as standard software on all of the devices that go out. Use them. There just really isn't a good excuse not to.
Okay, Chee, we did the Wi-Fi thing. What do you got?
I say, stop being so lazy with your authentication. Come on, strong passwords, password vaults. There's a ton of good ones out there that are free. I happen to use one that's not free, but not horribly expensive, and it generates complex passwords for me. Some are pronounceable, some aren't. But the whole deal is you really ought to be using complex passwords. And in fact, if your systems provide access using multi-factor authentication, you know, that's not a bad idea. You know, something you know and something that you have. It's not that big a pain in the butt if it prevents you becoming the next Sony.
I think that's the new battle cry. I don't want to be Sony. Curtis, what else can we do to not be Sony? I'm thinking specifically of maybe some physical protection, because we always hear stories of devices that get lost, and then the nightmare is what was on the device.
Oh, exactly. Now, in the news, we tend to talk a great deal about the software attacks, the people who are sitting there sniffing, the man in the middle, all of these things. But the fact is that many of the biggest data leaks of the last decade have come about because people just walked off and left a device sitting on a table, in a cab, in a hotel room, and they never went back to get it. So the first thing you do is, you know, remember to take your device with you. But if you can't do that, then make sure you know where it is. Now, whether you're using iOS or Android or a Windows mobile device, there are applications there that let you know where that device is. The same is true for Windows or Mac OS laptops. The key for the end user is remembering to turn the damned app on. If it's just sitting there on the system, but the little slider or checkbox or whatever mechanism is left unchecked, it doesn't do you any good. Turn it on, remember your device, and if you don't, remember to look at the app to see where it is. Go back and get that darn thing before people can start snooping around your data.
Location, location, location. My next one, I think, it's actually in the same vein as yours, because devices get lost all the time. And that is, again, kind of a little bit of evangelizing for me, but I want 2015 to be the year of encryption. There's no reason in this day and age for every device that you own, every USB stick, every external hard drive, every internal SSD, to not have encryption. You should have encryption turned on. It's built into Windows 7 and 8. You can get it in Mac OS 10, and you can even get it for your USB devices. So I'd say if you are planning to go overseas, especially if you're going to go into enemy territory, and we all know what that actually means, you have to make sure that it's not as easy as someone stealing your device or borrowing it for a couple of minutes and doing a dump. Encrypt, encrypt, encrypt. At least make it a little bit more difficult for the bad guys to get your data.
And on that note, I'll tell you, it's gotten a heck of a lot easier. There used to be BIOS that you use to boot up your laptop, your server, what have you. But now there's UEFI, which is an amazing system that actually allows you to encrypt the system, not just the hard drive, but the system. In fact, if you take the hard drive out and you don't clear the encryption, it's now a brick. In fact, Dell, when they got me through training on how to install and use UEFI, they said, for God's sakes, make sure you record the password someplace, because if you forget it, your laptop's a brick. You can't even just change things. You can't reflash it. Your laptop is a brick. It's easy now. In fact, UEFI as a carrot means you can now have boot partitions significantly larger than 2 terabytes on your servers, your laptops, and so forth. Encrypt, encrypt, encrypt.
Now, all the things that we've been talking about make us sound awfully paranoid, but in many ways, paranoid is the new black. It's the right mindset to have. especially if you are traveling outside of a safe area. And for most of us, safe area is defined as our own home or our own office. If you're going out in the world, you need to have a paranoid mindset. And if you are going someplace where the threat level is higher, whether that is an international destination or someplace local, I'm thinking of DEF CON here in the U.S., be prepared to take extraordinary steps. You know, we hate to say it in this modern age, but there are times when a pencil and pieces of paper are the most secure communications. It may be that an old laptop with nothing on it but a browser that you can use to get to web services and on which you don't have it store your username and passwords is the way to go. Think about things that won't hurt you if they're left behind or destroyed. That's a level of paranoia that can keep you happy in the end, even if it makes life just a little bit more dramatic and less convenient in the short term.
Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for those tips, those helpful tips for traveling with data in 2015. Now, I'm sure most of us are going to go out and violate all those principles, but at least we heard it once at the start of the new year. Now, when we come back, we're going to be bringing back a old friend of the show, Mr. Cricket Lou. He is the guru of all things DNS. He's going to be talking to us about best practices and a few interesting developments in the world of DNS. It's always great to have Cricket on. But before we do that, let's go ahead and take another break to thank the second sponsor of this episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and it's Lynda. Now, if you are a fan of the Twit TV network, then you know Lynda. We use them on Know-How. We use them on Coding 101, and we use them on most of our shows. They are the repository of knowledge on the internet. They're great for learning new skills or brushing up on old ones, but I bet you didn't know that Lynda is also the go-to place if you work in the enterprise. They offer multi-user solutions to help schools, businesses, and government agencies. With lynda.com, you can train your team, department, or your entire organization, including your employees, your students, your faculty, and staff, on demand 24/7. Lynda.com integrates with your network for simple access and administration, allowing you to provide users with lynda.com course content through your learning management system. Now, IT departments can use lynda.com to provide a virtual help desk to reduce support calls, assist with upgrades and migrations, whether your team is upgrading to the latest version of Windows or Microsoft Office, or migrating to entirely new applications. Lynda can keep your organization up to date on the latest software and technology skills alike. For example, how to use SharePoint or Google Apps. Lynda lets you train new hires on relevant software in finance, coding, web design, Photoshop, negotiation, Excel, productivity tips, SEO, and so much more. They've also got a video course for every department in your company, so you can consider them not just as a repository for knowledge, but a companion for your enterprise. For the Twilight Riot, there are also courses on everything from data science and business intelligence to network administration and enterprise content management. Lynda is the perfect companion if you want to know everything there is to know about how your business runs. We use Lynda at the Twit Brickhouse as a go-to reference for our entire team. In fact, our editors are currently using it as they prepare to transition from Final Cut to Premiere Pro. To learn more about lynda.com solutions for your school, business, or government agency, visit lynda.com/twiet. That's lynda.com/TWIET to request more information. And we thank lynda.com for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Let's get back to it. We welcome to the show, or back to the show, Mr. Cricket Lou from Infoblox. Cricket, thank you so very much for taking the time to talk to our folks here in the Twilight Riot.
Great to be back, Padre.
Now, the last time you were here, you were evangelizing about secure DNS, and you were telling us why this is the system we're going to have to move to. And the nice thing is, you were honest with us about the things that were just lacking in DNS as it was first envisioned for the internet. Now, people should go ahead and watch that older episode. Just run through our inventory to find Cricket Lou again, because it was a fascinating look at how the internet has developed over the years. But since then, you've kind of gone on a worldwide tour as an evangelist for DNS best practices. What's the biggest question that you fielded from IT managers and folk who just want to know how to make DNS work better?
Well, you know, I think that folks are concerned about DNS now because, unfortunately, DNS is being exploited all over the internet in big amplification attacks, big reflection attacks. I think that seems to be the big worry nowadays is how do I prevent my DNS infrastructure from being used to DDoS somebody else, and also how do I prevent somebody from DDoSing my own DNS infrastructure.
Yeah, and actually we've seen that information. We covered in a previous TWIET, there were a couple of reports, one of them stating that DDoS attacks on DNS infrastructure is on the rise, and it's actually continuing. It was a 58% rise in the number of DDoS attacks on DNS servers in between 2013 and 2014, and that we were also seeing a much wider range of attack types. TCP, UDP, ICMP flooding, DNS amplification, DNS cache poisoning protocol anomalies, DNS tunneling, and DNS hijacking. When you describe these scenarios to the people in your presentations, are they aware of it, or is a lot of this still sort of arcane knowledge?
I think folks are increasingly aware of these kinds of attacks. It used to be that you know, the folks like me who talked about DNS security, we'd talk about cache poisoning attacks, for example, and folks would say, well, can you point me at an example of a real-world cache poisoning attack? And we had a hard time with that. We had a hard time saying, well, we know about this cache poisoning attack or that cache poisoning attack. Well, you know, unfortunately, now we've got a bunch of examples. The DNS-based DDoS attack is not just easy to find an example of, it's become almost prevalent. So yeah, people are much more receptive to the message now than they were just a few years ago when we were talking about these types of exploits.
Yeah, I can imagine that, because there was a lot about DNS theory, which it was so ivory tower. I mean, yeah, we understood how DNS could be used in a bad way, but we hadn't really seen a lot of attacks in the wild. That changed in the second half of 2014, and DNS became one of the primary ways that you could be vulnerable because the protocol was so well known.
Yeah, in fact, one really interesting example, something that was totally unexpected to me, was an account that was published by someone at the Internet Storm Center, which said that according to data that they had ferreted out of passive DNS data collected by carriers around the internet, they had seen all of the major public web-based email services. They'd had their DNS data poisoned probably for a period of at least 6 to 12 months.
Wow.
Which suggests that email to those, you know, to users of those public email services, between those services, could have gone who knows where. You know, could have gone to a mail transport agent that was hostile, could have been copied, could have been modified without those users' knowledge.
Cricket, this reminds me of the discussion we're having now about advanced persistent threats, especially in light of Sony. And you've got a lot of experts who are saying, look, the next major attack is already happening. It's already in place. You've already got systems that have been compromised. Do you get that sense with DNS? Because it can take months and months, years, to figure out that your DNS just isn't working the way you want it to work, because we kind of take it for granted. Have you seen much of that buzz going on?
Yeah, I think that there's an increasing realization that DNS is being used all the time. It's being used not just for DDoS, it's being used to subvert, for example, your traditional firewall mechanisms, to tunnel data out of organizations, into organizations bidirectionally. DNS is just not a very widely policed channel. Most folks have no idea what domain names they're looking up, and there are lots of different clever ways to tunnel data out of an organization or into an organization using DNS. Yeah. So we're beginning to instrument enterprises and other organizations' DNS infrastructures to actually let them see what's going on. You know, what domain names are they looking up? What sorts of patterns can they identify? Are they looking up lots and lots of text and sync records, which have really, really large payloads, which might indicate that they're trying to somebody's trying to bring data into the organization? Or are they looking up lots of, kind of random looking domain names with very, very long first labels, which might be embedding binary data in, base 64 or something like that, exfiltrating that data from the enterprise network?
Let's break that down a little bit, because we've had several of our security gurus. We've had Raphael Mudge and we've had Steve Gibson both explain how DNS gets used to obfuscate traffic, both coming into and out of a network. If you were to sit down with someone coming to one of your seminars and you had to explain to him or her what they had to look for in DNS, how they had to lock down their DNS, because it could be being used to shuttle information in and out, how would you explain it to them, and how would you tell them to lock it down?
That's a great question. So, I'd say one simple example is if you had a piece of malware within an organization, it had already infected, say, a laptop, and it wanted to bring in a bunch of binary code surreptitiously. It could do that by doing a long sequence of lookups, 1.foo.example, 2.foo.example, 3.foo.example, and just looking up text records for each of those domain names. And those text records, first of all, it can be more than one text record per answer, but they can also be quite long themselves. And then you just serialize those. Those are probably going to be ASCII data, so they might be binary data encoded in say, base 64. You serialize that data, you decode it, and then you have a big blob of binary data, which amounts to this, this new code that you're trying to move in, or what have you. So, one traditional way we've had of identifying something like this is to turn on query logging on your name servers internally. That can be kind of expensive in terms of resources, but at least the query logging allows you to take a look at what's being looked up, say, hey, are there interesting patterns here? In fact, almost no legitimate software is going to do a lot of text record lookups or sync record lookups or something like that. So that's probably a red flag, simply seeing a query like that. There's also a new mechanism called response policy zones, something that Paul Vixie and Vernon Shriver came up with. And response policy zones allow you effectively to say, if somebody tries to look up, say, text records for this domain name, or an address record for this domain name that I know is malicious, don't send the correct answer. Instead, synthesize a false answer, maybe an error, maybe a redirection to a honeypot or another system that's in your walled garden, so that the malware or whatever it was that tried to do that lookup is effectively neutered.
Right. We've got people in the chat room. We've got Sinak, who says, that's it, I'm going back to dotted quads. Which sometimes I feel like doing that myself. But we've also got JJ to the 4884 who's saying, well, is Google DNS vulnerable? And I think that's actually one of the problems, in that people are looking, well, is it a system vulnerability? Is it a bad DNS server? But at its root, it's just that DNS was never equipped to fight this kind of exfiltration of information. I mean, that's what we're talking about, right? Using DNS to obfuscate the flow of information across a perimeter security, because as you said, most of us don't look at the DNS traffic going into and out of our traffic. It's a trusted protocol. It's a trusted lane of traffic. And as far as you're suggesting to turn on query logging, every time I hear that, it sounds like a great idea, but it also means you either need a tool or a staff who is attentive enough to the logs to make a difference that they can stop a breach in progress. A lot of this it's forensic, right? We look at it after the fact and say, oh yeah, that's how they got their data.
Right, right. Which is one of the reasons that RPZ is a nice alternative to query logging, because with RPZ you can simply say, if somebody sends a query that returns an address in this range, if somebody sends a query for this type of data associated with this domain name, lie to them in the response. And moreover, log the fact that they tried to look it up, and log the IP address of the querier so that I can go take some sort of corrective action. If somebody tries to look up command and control server.malware.org's address from such and such an IP address, well, I ought to go look at the client at that IP address and see if it is in fact infected with some species of malware.
See, it sounds so simple when you say it. I mean, of course, that's what I should do. But, and I'm going to make a broad generalization here, there are a lot of IT people out there who are just happy when DNS works properly, and they're not going to go that extra mile to set up DNS so that it proactively looks for breaches and breaching agents. What are the best practices that you can offer to the struggling IT person who's maybe trying to do things with a shoestring budget, who can't buy a lot of appliances, who can't buy a lot of consultation time, and yet wants to lock down DNS in his or her network?
Well, you know, Infoblox would certainly love to sell them appliances, and we do support RPZ in our appliances, but Bind 9.8 and later versions of Bind also support response policy zones, and you can roll out Bind for free if you're comfortable compiling it up and managing a Bind name server. That's a great way to do it. In the end of the year, for non-retailers, I guess, is probably kind of a slow period where you might be able to roll out new versions of Bind that include RPZ support. You might be able to take a little bit of time to read some of the documentation on RPZ as well. So I'd say that's definitely a best practice. I'd also tell people it's a good time to take a look at the monitoring that you do of your DNS infrastructure, even just basic things like monitoring query load on your external authoritative name servers, monitoring query load on your forwarders, so that you can identify anomalies. You can say, hey, you know, this is what my normal query load looks like. Today, it's 100 times that. Maybe that means that I'm being DDoSed. Maybe it means that I'm being used as an amplifier and as a reflector, and I'm trying to DDoS somebody else.
Right. I have to say, on a personal note, whenever I watch your webinars, there's always, in every single one of them, there's always a little bit of an aha moment where I go, I didn't know you could do that. and it's like, oh my gosh, that's so powerful. Yeah, so people have to check that out. When we come back, I'm going to bring in my co-host because we do want to talk a little bit more about best practices. And there's a recent development in DNS happened at the end of 2014 that I want to get your take on. But before that, let's go ahead and take a break to thank the third sponsor of this episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and it's ZipRecruiter. Now, are you hiring? Do you know the best place to post your job posting to find the best candidate? Because let's be honest, that's what it's all about. If you don't find the right person, and I'm not just talking about talents, I'm not just talking about skill set, I'm just talking about finding someone who can do the job, but finding someone who actually has the compatibility with your company's culture, well, then it's just not going to be a good placement. That's what ZipRecruiter is here to help you with. Posting your job in one place just isn't enough to find quality candidates. If you want to find the perfect hire, you need to post your job on all the top job sites, and now you can. With ZipRecruiter.com, you post your job to 50+ job sites, including Craigslist, LinkedIn, and Twitter, all with a single click. Now I actually have used ZipRecruiter in my other job when we were looking for IT people, and it's wonderful because it gives you a nice, well, reaping of candidates. And then you can look through those candidates' profiles to see if they're going to be a good fit for the job that you're putting them in. Again, not just skill set, but culture. That's what ZipRecruiter is about doing, matching the exact candidate with the exact job. Now, they can find candidates in any city or industry nationwide. Just post once, and your qualified candidates will roll in. Now, there are no juggling of emails or calls to your office. You can quickly screen candidates, rate them, and hire the right person on the spot. Find out today why ZipRecruiter has been used by over 250,000 businesses. Right now, our listeners can try ZipRecruiter for free for 4 days. Just go to ZipRecruiter.com/Twyet. That's ZipRecruiter.com/Twyet to find out more. And we thank ZipRecruiter for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Let's get back into it. Cricket, there was a story that surfaced at the end of 2014, and it made me think that it was the end of 2013 because it was all about the MPAA trying to dig into the DNS system and essentially redo SOPA. Can you talk a little bit about what happened?
Well, my understanding of it is that what was, I don't know, leaked or revealed was that the MPAA had gone to one of their law firms to ask for an opinion on the viability of basically issuing takedown notices to ISPs to say, hey, you know, the following site on the internet has some copyright infringing material on it. We're going to ask all of these ISPs, actually demand that these ISPs remove the DNS data or block the DNS data for those sites, which is pretty remarkable. And as you point out, very similar to SOPA, which was back in 2011 or something like that, October 2011, I think.
Yeah, it's amazing that they just tried to go back to that because, I mean, the first time it happened, you had all these technology experts who were saying, look, this is going to break the internet. You can't have people filing takedown notices of DNS entries just because you think that they might be posting infringing content, especially if you're not going to put a system of due process. But it gets even more technical to that. As a DNS person, what is your main issue with putting into the hands of a non-judicial entity the ability to strike entries out of DNS?
Well, it's really no different now from what it was back in 2011 when this was one of the provisions of SOPA. And, you know, a lot of very bright people, a lot of people who are smarter than I am, like Dan Kaminsky and Steve Crocker, did an analysis of this, and they said, if you do this, then a recursive name server that's trying to look up the IP address of some supposedly infringing site will, you know, have to block that. There's no provision in DNSSEC to do that. That's just a lie, and you won't be able to cryptographically validate that response. So if you allow that kind of thing, then basically all DNS will be subject to downgrade attacks, and it'll be possible for folks who have nothing to do with the MPAA to do similar sorts of things and potentially to block your access to legitimate sites that have no copyright infringing material whatsoever.
Right. Yeah, essentially the only way to do that on the technical level would be to essentially run a DNS cache poisoning attack on yourself, and also to downgrade secure DNS in order to be able to do that. It's just kind of baffling. I want to bring in my co-host here. Chee, you've done a lot of DNS work. You're way more competent in DNS than I am. But listening to Cricket, what are some of the things that you tell to your students, especially when you go out and you teach and you explain and you demo about securing DNS on, say, a campus?
The biggest problem I find with DNS in general, especially when it's run by an organization that's stretched way too thin, it's cleanup. You know, you go and make changes, you have all this trash left over, a machine gets pulled off, nobody cleans up. Now this gets amplified quite a bit when you start using Active Directory updates. The unfortunate fact of life is cleanup just never really happens. Now, I do want to make a comment about all these attacks. The silver lining about all these DNS attacks is my users are finally aware that when DNS is having a problem, the internet's not necessarily down. They've stopped saying the internet's down. They're now saying, okay, are we having another DNS attack? So the silver lining is my users are starting to get educated about how the internet really works, and they're starting to demand that the DNS systems be fixed, which is a massive thing because previously a lot of people weren't allowed to spend money to upgrade. So now finally money's getting released, our DNS systems are starting to get upgraded, and more time is being released so that people can go and audit and take a good hard look at what's going on.
Right. Curtis, let me throw over to you because one of the aha moments that I have whenever I'm doing administration is, for example, when I turn one of our parishes or one of our small retreat houses over to a third-party DNS like Google or OpenDNS, and suddenly all their queries go so much faster, and they realize that it was just a weak DNS on their ISP that was slowing down their internet access. They have that aha moment of, oh, okay, I guess we should have been spending resources on this. Is there a similar aha moment in the enterprise? Do they look at securing DNS as a way to, A, stop what Cricket's talking about, which is the exfiltration of sensitive information, a la the Sony breach? Is it a way to finally say, look, I know you haven't wanted to spend money on DNS because it seems like it's working, but this is one of the ways we secure our company. Is that the enterprise aha moment? Oh, you're muted. Okay. I think you're muted on our side. Hold on. Okay, Curtis, try it.
Okay.
Okay, so go ahead and start that again. Actually, can you put a bug there so that the editor knows? Okay. All right, Curtis, so just as if you were coming, I'm going to ask you again. Stay on, Curtis. So what is the enterprise aha moment?
Well, I think Sony might very well be because, you know, there's nothing like the threat of massive legal action to convince someone that a reasonable expense might just be a good thing. And the nice thing is that with DNS and security, the explanations can be fairly simple. You don't have to go into the gory details to make the case that by controlling the way that people get to you, you can help control what they can do when they arrive. And that's a compelling case. So I think that it is very likely that if IT will take the initiative, they can use this to really gain some traction in getting much better control over DNS for security purposes. And the fact that, oh, by the way, it's going to boost our performance won't hurt even a little bit.
Right. Cricket, let me throw this over to you, and I think we have to make this the last point of the show. When you were last on, we had a lot of audience members who were saying, well, secure DNS sounds good, but we just don't know if X is going to pay for it. We don't know if we'll be able to allocate resources for it. DNS seems to be working just fine. Do you think that now, with a new eye on security and a new eye on DNS and what secure DNS can do for you, that, well, let me say it, that your business is going to pick up? I mean, is Infoblox now going to be seen as a vital upgrade? Are you going to have to look at your DNS system because it is one of the most vulnerable that you run in your campus plant?
Well, you know, I hate to be, you know, an ambulance chaser, I guess, but, you know, we certainly appreciate that this does provide an opportunity for us. It's not how we'd particularly want to be successful, and I think that our success is actually somewhat separate from the success of DNSSEC. But yeah, these are really, really important things, and you know, I honestly believe that DNS security and DNSSEC, the DNS security extensions, are really important regardless of my organizational affiliation. And you know, DNS is used, as I like to say, to mediate every non-trivial transaction that occurs over the internet. And if it can't be trusted, then you can't do anything safely over the internet. So I think it's absolutely vital that DNS be as secure as possible. And that really requires the implementation of DNSSEC. And as we've seen with, you know, things like DNS servers being used, being exploited in big DDoS attacks and being victimized in big DDoS attacks, it doesn't stop there, right? There are all sorts of things that you need to pay attention to with regard to the security of your DNS infrastructure.
Well said, Cricket. Well said. Thanks. I want to thank you all for using up another hour of your time to listen to This Week in Enterprise Tech. It is always so much of a pleasure to bring you the best of the enterprise each and every single week. That's right, it's the best enterprise podcast on the planet. That's according to 9 out of 10 compromised DNS servers. I want to thank everyone on my panel who made this show possible. Of course, first to Mr. Cricket Liu. Cricket, it's always a humbling pleasure to have you in studio. Thank you so very much for coming up. We're going to have you back because we do want to do a DNS heavy show. This was sort of DNS Lite. This was to bring people in 2015. They got to start considering whether or not they're going to upgrade their DNS to secure DNS. But in case they want to find out more between now and then, where do they go to find out about you, about secure DNS, and about Infoblox?
Well, we have lots of information available on our website, which is www.infoblox, which is blox.com. And then they can follow me on Twitter, at CricketOnDNS. If they want to find out where I'm having coffee, it's at Cricket Liu.
That's Cricket Liu. If he doesn't know about it and DNS, it probably doesn't exist. I also want to thank my co-hosts, starting with Mr. Brian Chee in studio here in Petaluma. Cheebert, thank you again. It's a pleasure to have you in studio. It's always a treat when we can actually be face to camera to face. Could you tell the Twilight Riot what you're going to be doing, where they can find you, and where they can find your work?
Actually, some of my students that were at the IETF meeting in Honolulu turned me on to this thing called DNS Dane. And one of the arguments that a lot of people have about DNSSEC is there wasn't really any kind of incentive to spend the resources. Well, these attacks are giving us one, but there's another carrot. What if we can put server certificates into the DNS records so that we don't need a certificate authority? We can say, yes, that really is me. Sounds like a heck of a carrot. Now, it's not a standard yet. It's still being worked on. But wow, I mean, wow. I think we're going to have an episode on DNS Dane. What do you think?
I'm not adverse to that. Fantastic. And my other New Year's, remember the New Year's baby in diapers, Mr. Curtis Franklin. It's great to open 2015 with you. Where can we find you? Where can we find out more about the agenda for Information Week Radio?
Well, this week I am going to be broadcasting at least some of my stuff from CES. I'll be doing that for Interop Radio on Tuesday, be doing it for Information Week Live on Friday. You can find me every Tuesday, 3 p.m. Eastern Time, and Friday, 3 p.m. Eastern Time. For those two shows, got lots of great stuff coming up, and we're starting to make our plans now to roar into that fabulous Interop conference coming up at the end of April.
It's great to hear. Thanks, Curtis. Thanks, Chee, and thanks, Cricket. It was a pleasure to open 2015 with you. Speaking of you, how about you? That's right, you, the person who's watching or listening right now. I want to thank you for another year of This Week in Enterprise Tech. 2015 looks to be awesome, and it will be awesomer if you're with us. Why not drop by our show page at twit.tv/twit. There you can find all of our episodes. If you want to watch the back episode with Cricket Lou, the last time you talked about secure DNS, you can find it there. And you can also find a drop-down menu so that you can automatically have every episode of Twit downloaded to your device of choice. Now, while you're subscribing, why not follow me on Twitter? You can find me at twitter.com/PadreSJ. If you follow me, you'll get my announcements about what's going to be on each episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech. And you can also suggest guests and topics for future episodes. In fact, I'd say about half of our episodes come directly from you because, well, that's just what we want to do. We want to give you the goodness that you want to hear. Speaking of goodness, why not join us live? That's right. You can find us here on the Twit TV network. For now, you can find us every Monday at 2:30 p.m. Pacific time at live.twit.tv. If you join us live, you'll be able to see what we do in the pre-show and the post-show and what happens during the actual show, all the stuff that gets cut out when you download. If you want to see what live television looks like, go ahead and drop on by because we show you everything, warts and all. It's how the sausage is made. And if you do like sausage, jump into our chat room because it is a sausage fest at irc.twit.tv. There you'll find some of the funniest members of the Twit Army. Folks, it's all part of the experiment that is Twit TV. I want to thank everyone here at the Brick House who makes this show possible, to Lisa and to Leo, of course, to Karsten, my super producer, and normally to Cranky Hippo, who's my TD, but today, my far superior TD, who is Victor. That's right, Filipinos got to represent. Until next time, I'm Father Robert Ballecer, just reminding you that if you want to know what's going on in the Enterprise, just keep quiet.